jaw-dropping true crime cases that got overlooked. The sun was barely rising over Somerton Beach, Australia, on December 1, 1948. The sea breeze rolled cold and quiet, carrying a faint smell of salt and morning dew. A local man walking his greyhound noticed something strange near the seawall. A man in a pressed suit, lying flat on the sand, his legs stretched neatly, his feet crossed, as though he had simply dozed off watching the ocean. But something about the stillness felt wrong. The man wasn't breathing. When the police arrived, they found a scene that was both peaceful and horrifying. The stranger had no wallet, no identification, no hat, which was unusual in that era, and every tag had been carefully cut out of his clothing. His shoes gleamed like they'd just been polished that morning. He looked almost staged, like an actor in a photograph. The autopsy revealed no signs of violence, no bruising, no wounds, no overdose indicators. Yet, there was one thing that didn't belong. The man's spleen was enlarged, and his liver showed traces of poison. But no toxin could be identified. To this day, it remains a medical mystery. The press called him the Somerton Man. Detective Sergeant Lean, the lead investigator, stood by the morgue window staring at the body. "We've got ourselves a ghost," he muttered. Every normal lead vanished instantly. There were no missing persons matching his face, no reports of a stranger seen in distress, nothing. Then came the first clue, the man's pockets. In one of them, folded with meticulous care, was a tiny scrap of paper that read only 2 words, Tamám Shud, Persian for "it is finished." Those words sparked a global obsession. Experts realized the phrase came from the final page of a rare book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of ancient Persian poetry. But whose book was it? And how did that torn scrap end up in the dead man's pocket? A week later, a man walked into a nearby police station carrying that very book. He claimed someone had tossed it into his car through the open window near Somerton Beach the night before the body was found. Inside the book was a hidden code, 5 lines of random letters and symbols, scribbled faintly in pencil. Rigobabd, Mliawi, Tbimpanip, and so on. No one could break it. Not the military, not cryptologists, not the CIA when the file later reached their hands. It wasn't gibberish. The pattern had intent, structure, rhythm. But what it said, no one knew. The handwriting analysis showed precision and intelligence. Whoever wrote it knew what they were doing. Investigators believed this wasn't an ordinary man. He was educated, maybe even trained. Some theorized he was a spy. After all, this was the Cold War era. Espionage and secrecy ran deep in 1948. But others believed it was something much more personal. A link appeared when police traced a laundry tag from his clothing to a tailor in Adelaide. From there, they found a suitcase stored in the train station cloakroom weeks earlier. Inside the case were more clothes with the tags cut out, a screwdriver, a stencil brush used for labeling cargo, and a pair of sharpened scissors. But once again, no name, no origin, no answers. Detective Lean stared at the coded note again late one night, his desk littered with photographs, train tickets, and autopsy reports. He circled one phrase from his notes, Tamám Shud, "it is finished." Was this suicide? Or a message? Then came another twist. A phone number written faintly on the back page of the mysterious book. It belonged to a woman living less than a mile from where the body was found. Her name was Jestin. When police knocked on her door, she answered calmly, but the moment they showed her the Somerton man's photograph, she nearly collapsed. Her hand trembled, her face went pale. "But I don't know him," she whispered, but her voice cracked. She refused to explain why she was terrified. Later, when officers left, she confessed to a friend that she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. She had given it, she said, to a man she met during the war. A man whose name she refused to say. Her son, Robin, born around the same time, had strikingly similar features to the Somerton man. The same rare ear shape, the same jawline. But at the time, DNA testing didn't exist. And so, the case went cold. By 1950, the man's body was buried under a simple stone reading. "Here lies the unknown man found at Somerton Beach, December 1, 1948. But decades later, investigators would reopen the case. A secret letter would resurface. And buried inside an unmarked government file was a name no one expected to find. A name that might finally reveal who the Somerton Man really was. By the time the 1970s rolled around, the Somerton Man had turned into more than just a mystery. He'd become folklore. People whispered theories in cafes, reporters revisited old police notes, and conspiracy enthusiasts scribbled circles and lines across grainy photographs, desperate to decode the secret that died with him. But inside the Adelaide Police Headquarters, the file labeled Somerton Beach, unidentified mail gathered dust on a forgotten shelf. Detective Lean was gone by then, retired and quietly haunted by what he couldn't solve. He used to say the case wasn't about a body, it was about what someone didn't want found. Then, in 1978, a journalist named Paul Lawson reopened the file. He was convinced the government had buried more than a corpse. In his first article, he wrote, "The Somerton Man Case is the only mystery where the answers are hidden in plain sight." And he wasn't wrong. When Lawson tracked down the old evidence box, he discovered something strange. The original Rubaiyat book, the one containing the coded message, was missing. Officially, it had been misplaced. The suitcase from the train station? Gone. Even the man's fingerprints had vanished from the police database. It was as if someone wanted the world to forget he ever existed. But Lawson wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. He started digging into the life of Jestin, the nurse who had reacted so oddly to the Somerton Man's photo decades before. She had changed her name, moved across Australia, and avoided interviews for years. But when Lawson found her, she was in her 70s, still sharp, still quiet. He asked her directly, "Did you know the man from Somerton Beach?" She looked him dead in the eye and said softly, "Some things are better left alone." But her son Robin's photograph, now an adult, told a story she wouldn't. The facial similarities were undeniable. Same lips, same ears, same eyes. The resemblance was chilling. Lawson began comparing timelines. Jestin had worked as a nurse during World War II. She was known to have had contact with military personnel, possibly foreign officers. And the Somerton Man's possessions hinted at something similar: the stencil brush, the tools, the coded notes. Could he have been an intelligence officer? When the journalist reached out to old Australian intelligence contacts, they refused to comment. One former officer only said, "That case is older than I am, but some files aren't meant to be opened." By the 1990s, the case reignited in the public eye. New DNA techniques had emerged, and cold case investigators petitioned to exhume the body. But government approval stalled over and over again. Bureaucratic delays, missing forms, unexplained rejections. Meanwhile, private researchers began noticing something eerie in the cipher, repeating letter patterns that matched parts of the Rubaiyat's verse structure. A linguist from Melbourne proposed that the code could be a poetic form of shorthand, a cipher only someone familiar with the poems could understand. If true, then the code wasn't random letters. It was personal. Each line might represent a person, a meeting, or a kill order. Still, no one could fully decode it. And then, almost 70 years after his death, in 2018, Professor Derek Abbott, an electrical engineer turned amateur sleuth, took up the case again. What made Abbott different was his method. He didn't just analyze evidence. He analyzed DNA. He managed to obtain partial genetic material from preserved hair strands taken from the plaster cast made of the Somerton Man's body back in 1948. It was barely enough, but modern sequencing gave him something no one else had: a genetic fingerprint. The results were shocking. They traced back to a distant cousin living in America. From that, genealogists began mapping family trees. Bit by bit, branch by branch, the unknown man began to take shape. Abbott finally identified him as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne, a man who had gone missing in 1947. He had no children, no known criminal record, and no history of espionage. But here's the part that made no sense. Webb's life didn't match the sophistication of the clues left behind. How could a quiet engineer craft a cipher that baffled military codebreakers for half a century? And why would he end up dead on a beach hundreds of miles from home, dressed in another man's clothes with no ID and a cryptic note declaring, "It is finished"? Abbott's conclusions sparked even more confusion. Some believed Webb wasn't the Somerton Man at all, but a scapegoat. Others thought the identification was correct, but that he was working for someone who made sure the truth would stay buried for generations. Abbott wasn't done. While reviewing old correspondence between investigators, he discovered something odd. In 1948, right after the autopsy, several unnamed men from an intelligence branch had requested access to the body. They claimed to be checking for foreign markers. When asked for identification, they provided none, and yet were allowed entry. The official record of that visit? Also missing. As Abbott pieced this together, he said something chilling in an interview. It's almost as if the Somerton Man wasn't just hiding who he was, but who he worked for. And then, as if the case hadn't twisted enough, one final discovery flipped the story on its head. The Rubaiyat wasn't just a random book. The specific edition found near the crime scene was so rare that only a handful of copies were ever printed, and every one of them had been distributed through military channels during the war. So how did this one end up in the car of a stranger, on a beach, next to a dead man with a perfect suit, a hidden code, and no past? No one could explain it. But what investigators didn't know was that there was still one more hidden layer to this story. Because tucked inside a forgotten drawer in the South Australian archives was a sealed envelope, marked "Confidential, Do Not Release." Inside that envelope was something that had never been shown to the public. A second piece of paper, identical in size and shape to the one found in the Somerton Man's pocket. But this one didn't say, Tamám Shud. It had just 3 words written in faint blue ink. Find the boy.